First, though, ahead of all children in England returning to school tomorrow, we can speak now to the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson. Thank you so much for being with us on the programme, Mr Williamson. Keen, of course, to talk about the return of pupils to the classrooms, but I just want to start on NHS pay, if I may. The government deciding to give nurses a pay rise of just 1%. What is it about the last year that's made the government feel that nurses deserve a pay cut in real terms?
Well, the government has at every stage been clear in terms of our commitment to the NHS. This is why over the last year we've seen an extra £6 billion being invested into the NHS. This is why over the next few years we're going to be seeing an increase of close to £34 billion going into the NHS. And over 1 million NHS staff are going to be receiving pay increases over and above that. But also, we are facing difficult economic challenges. We're facing almost 750,000 people who are unemployed. And we have, in the context of that, decided to exempt the NHS from the public sector pay freeze, which is the only part of the public sector that has been exempted from that.
At the same time, though, nurses are getting a pay rise of 1%. I mean, inflation next year is expected to be 1.5%, so that works out as a pay cut in real terms. I can't help thinking this has got a flavour of Marcus Rashford about it. You know, everyone can see the U-turn coming. Are you just being wheeled out to defend a policy that the government's going to row back on?
Well, over the last few years, we've seen record increases in terms of the pay going to our nurses and our doctors, quite rightly. We are facing... Enough, then? We're effectively facing a much more difficult economic time and economic period. We've seen a shrinking of our economy of 10%. But what this is part of a process, and we've put this forward for nurses and for the NHS. But we are always investing in our NHS. This is why we've had a record investment this year and continued record investment in our National Health Service over the coming years.
The Royal College of Nursing is considering industrial action. Would that be responsible?
Well, what we always want to do is work with all of our partners within the NHS to be able to get to the very best possible place. We've seen the NHS do magnificent work over the last year. We've seen a massive investment in terms of our NHS, but also in terms of tackling COVID.
But on industrial action specifically, would industrial action be responsible?
Well, no one wants to see industrial action. I'm certain the Royal College of Nursing wouldn't want to see industrial action. But the government is completely committed to our investment in the NHS. You've seen that all the way through the pandemic, but you've seen that over the past 10 years, where you've seen record increases in the amount of investment and the amount of money that we've been putting into the NHS. And that isn't just going to be continuing over this year, but it's going to be continuing over subsequent years as well.
OK. At a time when, you're talking about the economic challenges, is it a good look when nurses are facing pay restraint, for example, that the Prime Minister's considering splashing out some money refurbishing the Downing Street flat?
Well, what we all recognise is that it's a period of real making sure that we have sort of restraint right across the public sector, but we aren't nervous about in terms of investing in those key public services such as the NHS, such as schools.
And investing in Downing Street makeover as well, then.
But, I'm like you, Sophie, probably more interested, more fascinated about making sure children get back to school tomorrow. And I know from my perspective as a dad that that's certainly what I'm wanting to see. And I'm sure what many of your viewers are wanting to see as well.
OK, well, let's move on to school, shall we? Do teachers deserve a pay rise?
Well, we saw this year the largest pay increase for teachers since 2005, but there is going to be pay restraint. There is going to be a pay freeze for the coming year, but we are continuing to invest in schools. We're continuing to invest in schools right across the country, making sure some of the lowest funded schools get extra increases, and this gives schools the resources in order to be able to support children as they return back to school. But we are facing, a tough economic time. That's why this year there will be a pay, for coming year there will be a pay freeze. But for this year that we're entering into, of course, teachers are seeing the largest increase since 2005.
OK. Now, of course, as you mentioned, schools going back tomorrow, or people return to the classrooms tomorrow. Big day for so many pupils and parents across the country. In secondary schools, pupils and staff will be asked to wear face masks. How is this going to be enforced?
Well, what we saw in September, we asked all children to be wearing face masks in communal areas where there are national restrictions, which increasingly covered and ended up covering the whole of the country. And what we saw during that period, there's an incredibly large number of pupils that followed the rules, that were supported in following the rules by teachers and members of staff, and it worked very, very well. And I think pupils recognise the importance of doing whatever they can do, not just to protect themselves, but to protect their friends and the whole school community, as well as their families and the wider community.
At the same time, it's quite different, though, isn't it? Asking children to wear face masks all day in the classroom rather than just in communal areas. And it sounds from your answer that there's not really anything that you're doing other than asking pupils to do it. In primary schools as well, teachers are just supposed to wear masks where possible. I'm really not sure what that even means. I mean, it sounds a little bit like you're saying this is too difficult for us to work out. We're just going to leave it to the teachers. You just sort it out yourselves.
Not at all. What we've done is we set up very clear guidance as to how teachers are best be able to approach this. And it's actually informed by Public Health England and their best advice as to how best to approach this and reduce transmission. But wearing a face mask is just one small element of all the protections that we put in place. It's whether it is the distancing, whether it's bubbling, whether it's keeping year groups together and smaller groups together, whether it's for staggered sort of home times and sort of welcoming to school times. All of these measures go towards reducing COVID. And what we saw between September and Christmas is incredibly successful in reducing the number of instances in COVID in schools. Only 0.2% of pupils had confirmed COVID during that time. So it goes to show it works. But we're adding these extra layers of protection, not just for masks, but also for testing, really to be able to support schools and help them. But it's not just one single thing. It's many, many things that schools are doing to be able to protect pupils and protect staff.
Of course, another way that you could reduce COVID transmission in schools would be through vaccinations. Would you like to see people under the age of 18 be eligible for vaccinations?
Yeah. Well, this has got to be absolutely informed by the best scientific and medical advice. And as you're aware, there currently isn't a vaccine that's available for those who are under 16 and only one available for those under 18. So we've really got to see the research of the trials, and we've got to look to the best medical and scientific advice that will be provided by the JCVI, who are the independent experts who are advising government on this. But when we look at vaccinations, I mean, the fact that we're rolling this out so incredibly rapidly, the fact that the number of doses that are going to be available to the NHS is going to be increasing from 2 million to 4 million a week, really goes to show the transformative progress that we're making. And the fact that this is what is going to help us unlock the whole of the country. And we look to next week, and I think the whole nation looks to next week with some real excitement, because we're looking towards next week, and it's the nation's first step out of lockdown, the first step towards this process of recovery and getting everyone back to the lives that we had just over a year ago.
You say there's going to be a process of recovery, and there clearly will have to be, a pretty substantial process of recovery to help children, particularly disadvantaged children, recover from a year of disrupted education. You've got a review going on into seeing how best pupils can catch up. One of the things that you've said it's right to have a discussion about is shortening that summer holiday and potentially moving to a 5-term year. Is that something that you're seriously considering?
Well, it's a whole range of different sort of proposals that we're looking at, whether it's a 5-term year, whether it's lengthening the school day, but also measures such as enhancing the support that we give to teachers, supporting them in their professional development, making sure they can be actually the very best of themselves. It's looking at different measures.
Specifically on the holidays, is that something that is seriously on the table? It could happen.
Well, we're looking at holidays, we're looking at lengthening the school day, we're looking at a whole range of measures. And we've asked Sir Kevin Collins to leave no stone unturned. For us, we see this as one of those moments, a little bit like the 1944 Education Reform Act that came out of the Second World War, about how we can be transformative in terms of changing and improving the opportunities for young people. But it's got to be evidence-based. We've got to look as to what is going to have the biggest positive impact on children's lives. That's the approach that we're taking, and that's what we're looking at, how we can improve the outcomes for children.
So it sounds like you're thinking about permanent, transformative, in your words, change. When is that review going to be announced? When will we know what you're going to do?
Well, it's a whole series of different changes. The first step of those changes were what we announced just the other week, where we set out our plans for catch-up, whether it's the expansion of small group tutoring
this
for
review
children from the most
specifically that's
disadvantaged
going
backgrounds.
on into helping children catch up. Do we know, what's the time frame of it? I mean, could it be in place for, this summer holiday?
Well, what we've done is we've asked Sir Kevin to look over a period of 18 months. What we're going to be doing as a department, as a government, is looking at a whole series of options and changes. But there are going to be, it's not just all going to be in one day when it's all announced. There's going to be a whole series of actions that we are going to undertake to improve the life chances, to improve the education of children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, but actually all children. How can we do the absolute most for every single one of them, to ensure that they do so much, get the very best out of themselves and get the very best out of their education?
OK, I want to talk now about exams. You've obviously cancelled exams as we know it for this year. You said that teachers can effectively decide on the grades that the pupils should get, and they can do this basically however they want. They can use mini tests, they can look at old exams, they can write their own tests. They can be done under exam conditions, they can be done under Zoom, they can be done at home, or they can look at coursework, they can look at classwork. I mean, how on earth can you expect exam results to be fair and consistent in these conditions?
Well, Sophie, we'd always start off on the basis of the best form of assessment would be through examination. Of course, that's the most consistent way of being able to assess children. But we haven't been in that position to be able to do that this year. So we've had to look at alternative models. This is why we've set out a very clear structure for teachers, building scaffolding and guidance around that, so they understand as to what grades should be awarded for individual pupils, making sure, and the teachers I speak to, really are approaching this in the most professional of manners and ways, recognising how important it is, using that guidance. But then on top of that, there's going to be both internal inspection and quality assurance within the school. But additional to that is the external quality assurance that will be coming from the exam boards. This is in the process of randomised testing, in terms of randomised audits of schools right across the country to make sure they've been following the guidance and the grades as they've been awarding are a fair assessment.
How many
of
schools or results will they be looking at then, just to put it in context?
And on top of that, if I can just add on top of that, is where there are outliers, where schools are submitted grades that do not seem to be consistent with what they've always been able to achieve in the past. Any of those outliers, exam boards will be able to look at those incredibly closely and actually work with the schools to make sure there is the right assessment. That's something that is going to be going right across the country, and there is going to be that large-scale randomised sampling, but additional to that.
What is large-scale then? What is what is large-scale randomised sampling? Like, how many samples are you going to look at?
Well, we're going to be looking extensively across all school settings, whether it's private schools, whether it's state schools.
How many?
And it will be many thousands that will be sort of looked at in terms of part of that process. Many thousands
of schools or grades or what?
Across schools, exam centres.
OK, because, I mean, I guess many would worry you're putting teachers in a bit of an impossible position here. You've got randomised exams, you've got internal assessments, but many teachers will know that there, of course, will be an incentive to actually inflate grades, to err on the side of generosity. And if they don't, and their peers do in other schools or in other classes, then they could be putting their pupils at a disadvantage for life.
Well, Sophie, I think that our whole teaching profession approaches this with the most serious sort of professional approach, and what you would expect and what you would want of teachers. And as teachers go into this process, they're going to be following the guidelines very, very closely. They're going to be looking at what the exam boards have issued, the grade descriptors of saying this is what a child is meant to have achieved if they're to be given an A, a B, or a C at A level, or a 9876 in GCSE. So they're going to be looking at that exceptionally closely. There's a whole process of internal quality assurance that has to go on within the school. But on top of that, that's at the overlaying all that is the quality assurance that's going to be there by the exam boards, looking at where there is potential malpractice and making sure they come down on that. But, of course, any form of assessment is never going to be as good as exams. That's why we're so committed to moving forward with exams if that had been possible. But that's not going to be feasible this year. And actually, if you've seen the response, the consultation we ran, that was over 100,000 people took part in it. And the response from those professional teaching organisations, they recognise that while this is a challenge for teachers, it is without a doubt the fairest and the best approach that we can possibly take in the unusual circumstances.
Now, I'm sure you'd admit it's been a pretty difficult year. We've had the exam fiasco, the algorithm fiasco of last summer. Children went back to school for one day in January only to be sent home again. Then, of course, according to the Education and Endowment Foundation, a decade of progress, closing that gap between privileged pupils and more disadvantaged, potentially lost. Do you think you've done a good job?
Well, my focus, Sophie, is always about trying to deliver the very best for children, whether that's for £1.7 billion catch-up money that we're delivering into schools, for the launch of a tutoring programme that supports and targets for children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, for the fact that we've launched a radical reform of post-16 education, making sure that children are best able to succeed in whatever route they go down. And my commitment, my absolute commitment, by making sure that children are back in school at the earliest opportunity. That's what my focus is, and making sure that children are back in school on Monday, tomorrow, and making sure they're in the position to be able to enjoy their education and really benefit from it. So that's my focus. I'll leave others to do the commentary.
OK. I'm just looking at the Cabinet approval ratings, the latest Cabinet approval ratings as voted for by Conservative Party members. Now, they're a pretty generous lot. Liz Truss is on plus 86, Rishi Sunak on plus 74. Priti Patel, who broke the ministerial code, is on plus 50. There's only two people in minus territory. There's Amanda Milling on minus 4.5. And then there's you on minus 43.6. It's not great, is it?
Well, Sophie, my focus is on one thing: getting our children back into school tomorrow, making sure that children get the benefit from education. And I think that's what people right across the country want to know, that our focus, the whole government's focus, is on, in terms of delivering the education that we want all of our children to benefit from. So you're very much talking about a Westminster story. What I think our nation's parents and our nation's children want to know is that they're going back to school tomorrow. They're going to have the benefit of a world-class education. That's what we're focused on delivering on.
Have you ever wondered if, part of the reason that you're in the job still is because you're really acting as a bit of a firewall for Boris Johnson? You're soaking up a lot of flack from the issues in education over the last year and protecting the Prime Minister.
Well, the Prime Minister and myself have a shared passion, this belief that we can transform education, transform the life chances of everyone. All the way through this pandemic, we have highlighted the consistent fact that education is our national priority, that schools would be the last things to close and the first things to open. And that's what we said, and that's what we're actually delivering on. So the Prime Minister and myself have that shared passion, that shared commitment for our schools, and most importantly for our children. that is where we're completely and utterly united on. And, as I say, it's very much a shared passion. That's what we're delivering on. That's why we've been putting the extra investment in terms of catch-up, helping children, not just those children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, but children from all backgrounds, best be able to get the best out of their school life.
OK, and as you say, the good news, certainly, to see all those pupils return to the classroom from tomorrow. Gavin Williamson, thank you very much for being on the programme. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.